So we looked at the 61 and its relationship, the inner truth and its importance in terms of the nature of our behavior. So we looked at the 61 and its relationship, the inner truth and its importance in terms of the nature of our behavior, and to understand the essence of why we behave the way that we do. You know, it's one of the first things that's liberating in design is that you get to see the way in which you operate is the way in which you operate is the way in which you operate. There's nothing you can do about that. That's your nature. That's the way it is. Okay. When we come to the other side of that, the polarity of that, we're dealing with the leader, the theme of the leader through the 60-second gate. And the 60-second gate is a gate of detail, like the 9th gate. In other words, the only two gates that are specifically about detail are part of our time. In other words, we've already seen the 9th gate, we've seen the taming power of the small, we've seen that step by step, all the tiniest little forms, all the tiniest little investigations, you know, going down to the nano level and looking at things. And here we're dealing with the 62. Now, the 62 is very, very significant. It is the bedrock of Maya. It's the bedrock of Maya. I'm a 62-1. This is my time. The whole thing about the 62 is that the 62, because it is a gate of expressing opinion, that is the opinion of the 17, that the 62 needs to substantiate opinion with detail. And at the moment that it does that, part of the gift of the 62nd gate, because it's a metamorphic gate, is that when it can't find a way to express it, it creates it. And what it creates is new terms, new expressions, new words. From me, you have personality crystal and design crystal, and you have generators and projectors and reflectors and manifestors. These are names of things that never existed. This is all part of the naming. This is the whole thing about the Maya. The Maya survives by being able to give a name to things. If it doesn't have a name, it doesn't exist. It's not in the Maya. It's got to have a name. And so one of the things about our time, since 1615 to now, is that basically we've spent most of our time naming things. Truly. I mean, think about all the creatures that have been given names, all the life forms that have been given names, all the planets and stars. They have an organization in New York that's desperately trying to name every star in the sky. It costs you $15, you can have a star named after you. Really. No joke. We need to give them names. If we don't give them names, most of the stars in the sky don't have a name. Really sad. We're getting a feed from all of them. Be nice to be able to sort of relate to them at a personal level. There's Jack 2. There's Susan 26. Whatever the case may be, they're out there. No, aside from the joke, everything about the 62nd gate is its ability to be able to explain things even when it doesn't have the tools. It makes them up. It creates words, creates them in order to express something. If you look at the 62-1, what you'll see is the ability to transcend the boredom of routine through a rich and daring fantasy life, the ability to organize the details through fantasy. And it's one of the ways in which we get to see the explosion in our time is because we've been able to add so many descriptions to so many things. We've given so many things names. I mean, it is truly incredible. Look at the language, English language. The English language has gained 600,000 words in the last 100 years. That's why it's the most powerful language in the world today in terms of its capacity to express, because there's 2 million words in the language. Now, 1 million of those happen to be technical. But almost all the technical language, those 1 million technical words, that 99% of them came into existence in the last 100 years. I mean, we have names for things that we didn't even know existed. And they're constantly coming up with names. And isn't it wonderful the way that works? There's a poster I love. It was done by a Norwegian photographer. Spent his whole life photographing butterflies all over the world. And he made a collection of butterflies on a poster, and all you see is one wing of each of these butterflies, and on each wing is a letter of the alphabet, A to Z, every single letter, as clear can be, every single letter on the wings of butterflies. Now those letters were here long before us. They were here before we had letters. They were already there. I mean, it's part of the magic, eh? They were already there. The words are there. They discover a rock the size of Manhattan Island. They discover a rock between Uranus and Saturn, and somebody calls it Chiron. Names. It's all names. If you'd called it Joe, what would it mean? It's all names. That name, Chiron, has spawned all kinds of concepts. Mythological being, after all. So this naming of things, very, very important to us. You know, the greatest manipulation is to give somebody a name. There's no greater manipulation. Parents to their children, gurus to their disciples, give them a name, change them. It's just a frequency. It's a formula. Remember that the 60-second gate is a gate of logic. These are sound formulas. It's one of the extraordinary things about the brain is that the brain does not store words. There's no such thing. The brain stores sound components. At least they come out as sound components that get strung together that we interpret as words when we hear them. But they're not stored as words. And so the 60-second gate has this magical capacity of being able to identify the names in the Maya. Remember, there's no choice. Everything you think and say and do takes place up to 5 seconds before your neocortex is aware of it. Everything. It's not like you're sitting there and saying, okay, I'm going to call my dog Harry. You already called it Harry before you knew you were going to call it Harry because it was already there. Your vanity is to say, yeah, I called my dog Harry. We all have these frequencies that we answer to. So the 60-second gate, this is our time. And you see, it's allowed us to get as deep into the Maya as any period in the history of consciousness. We're so deep into the Maya because we got all these names. It's like when people first came to design in the early years and they said, oh my God, how are we ever going to master, all of these channels and all of these gates and all of these lines and all of these, and you discover very quickly that you can because it's you. It's always been there inside of you, and all the names have been there inside of you, always. And yet the moment that you have a name for it, the moment you understand how it works, oh, I have this gate, that's me. Oh, what a name does. Like that, bang, you have access. If it doesn't have a name, you don't have any access. It's like going into one of these search engines and you don't quite know how to give it exactly what you need to get where you want. And you see right away that if you don't have the right name, it doesn't work. You need the name. So this dynamic theme of the 62 and the whole business about fantasy, that is to be able to develop the language to describe the expansion of our understanding of our environment. The more we would learn, the more names we would need. They're still naming new species that they're discovering every day. It's going on all the time. We're constantly naming things, constantly. You open up any publication dedicated to research, and you will see all of these new names. This is us. This is our time. Now think about something. In 2027, no more new names. It's just not going to be there. Nobody is going to create a name to explain anything. The round is coming to an end. We're getting to the end of our potential vocabulary. And our vocabulary is enormous. We have thousands of languages. We have dozens of enormous languages with deep penetration and large vocabularies. We have this enormous expression of the Maya, but it's coming to an end. There's not going to be the expansion of languages. You're going to see a whole compression take place. We are losing languages every day in this world. It's not just species that are becoming extinct. Languages are dying all the time on this planet, at the fastest rate in the history of the planet. They're simply disappearing. They're disappearing because we're dealing with another way in which we're communicating, because we have a universal communication system at work. Only dominant languages are going to survive. It's a whole movement. It isn't about growth and expansion. It isn't about the new word and the new description. Remember, they're not going to care. It's not going to be their theme to find the inner truth. It's not going to be their theme to come up with the facts. They're going to rely on what we establish. And even in that, they're not going to pay a hell of a lot of attention to it. It was simply the old way, after all. That 60-second gate, it's related to the 15th gate, and the 15th gate, the gate of extremes. And the first line of the 15 is duty. It says the ability to confront any challenge without expectation. It's one of the most extraordinary things about the way in which we've developed intellectually over the last several hundred years. You can see that in the way in which film has developed, so that we've gotten to a point now where you can put on screen at a level of seeming reality any fantasy. It doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter how bizarre. It doesn't matter how complex. It doesn't matter what it is. It's not like those, old Buck Rogers movies where you could see the steam coming out of the rocket and the strings on the planets. We've reached a point where, our ability to be able to detail and to be able to express our vision is extraordinary. It allows us to meet enormous challenges. It's one of the things to understand about carnivores. The whole success of carnivores is because carnivores have to develop strategies in order to succeed. Humans, in the role of killer monkey, we have been better at being able to create and communicate and work in strategies than any other species ever. It's what makes us so dangerous. We have this incredible strategic capacity. After all, if you take a look at our history and you take a look at our biohistory, particularly in Africa where, modern humans arose, we were certainly not well equipped at the physical level to be able to compete, even with dogs. The wild dog was much more successful in that sense, given its physical capacities than humans, but we had this brain. We had this capacity not simply to be able to look into the future in terms of creating a strategy. And remember, that's what logic is all about. You don't create a word for the now, you create a word so that it can benefit the future. It allows you to understand something and therefore move forward. And the moment you had strategy that can look into the future, you had something very special, and to be able to communicate it in detail. So this capacity in humans to be able to meet any challenge, because we can speculate, we can imagine what the future will be. I don't think anybody truly appreciates how incredible it was for the Americans to put men on the moon. I don't think anybody really appreciates that. How incredible that was. When you think about human consciousness, what it took to be able to do that, the technicalities involved, the calculations involved. The calculations are extraordinary.
You know, most human beings don't think much about what it takes to get a vehicle out of the gravitational field of the planet. You know, what the precise angle is, how fast you have to be moving, you know, what the physics of that is, what the physical bodies have to go through, the technology to develop all of that. I mean, all of it, really incredible. And all of it because we have this capacity to be able to logically progress out into the future and lay out plans and trajectories. This is us. There is no extreme that we cannot imagine and therefore are ready to confront. You know, I can remember when we had the heart of the Cold War and we had the MAD philosophy, you know, mutual assured destruction. There were always people wandering around saying, we'll make it, we'll adapt, you know, we'll find a way, you know, let them all wipe out most of them, but some of us will get away with it. Because there's always within us this ability to be able to look out into the extreme, any extreme, and to be able to plan for it. All of that gives us the ability to be able to investigate, to be able to explore, to scientifically be able to verify things. But this is our time. I really want to stress that. 1615, 2027. That's the window for all of this. See, we're so used to it. It's like people who think that progress, so-called, is going to keep on progressing, you know. We're going to get faster cars and we're going to fly to the stars. You're nuts. If we don't get to the stars by 2027, we're never getting to the stars. It's not going to happen. It just won't. There won't be any interest. I mean, as it was, there were tens of millions of people on Earth who couldn't have cared less that anybody went to the moon. What for? Bring back some rocks? You know, $3 trillion later, you got some rocks? They're in a museum? You can look at them and date them? Hey, you know, this is our age. That's not tomorrow. Tomorrow they're not going to spend that kind of money on finding some rocks. Because it's not interesting. It isn't about us exploring the extreme and getting all the detail and having all the facts and knowing everything and understanding it and having all the secrets. This is our time. It isn't going to belong to our grandchildren. It isn't. There isn't going to be this energy there saying, this is it, this is what we have to do, and we've got to be in a hurry, and we're pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing. Since 1961, we're in a first-line theme. First-line theme, if you don't have a solid foundation, you're nervous. You feel insecure. You feel inferior. We're under enormous psychological pressure, the whole planet, not to be an idiot, to understand how everything works. You know, when I look at public television, most of the time it's garbage. But then every once in a while you have this incredible programming where they're really teaching their society incredible things. I mean, incredible things. Watch the fabulous discussion of genetics. It was on one of the German stations. I was in a hotel somewhere. Incredible information available. But it's now, there's all this pressure, and there's all this pressure to get it on everybody. And I really want you to understand, because that's the whole point of this. I'm not a prophet, I'm a mechanic. The mechanics to me are always obvious. I look at the line of geometry and I look at the structure of the program, and it's just obvious. It's just obvious. When we get into the middle of this century, and there's somebody that watches this, what they're going to realize is that's exactly how it works. Because they're going to see this is what happens. It just comes to an end. Something else arises. You know, we'll talk tomorrow about what 2027 brings for us, for the rave. There's a whole new program. It's a whole new program. And we begin to see this is the way the evolutionary pattern works. It isn't about our personal trips. It isn't about that, we're suddenly in an era where we think that, that the telephones are going to get smaller until you can just swallow them and it isn't going to happen. See, there's only a few things left that we need to know. And we're almost there. In the technical sense, in the scientific sense. We're very, very close. In the next 25 years, I'm convinced of that, we will get the basic answers that we need. But what's interesting for me in terms of looking into the future, because that's what this great course is about, is to be able to see how difficult in so many ways it's going to be for the transition generation as the new cycle opens up. Because this is the way it's always been. And because we have this information now so that we can actually see a turning point in the cycle, we can begin to investigate the movement through the cycle, that we can begin to see how that phenomena works. I have children that are born in this cycle who are going to live their maturity in the next one. What is their life, in that sense, going to be like? To be able to understand that there is a real changing in the dynamics. They're first-line beings. The world's going into a six-line theme. There are all these transitions that are taking place, how that is going to impact on everyone. But to really understand that the dynamism of this age, and its seeming endless capacity to keep on expanding, that this is a bubble. It's a bubble and it's going to burst. Okay, so let's finish this off and we go over here to the 4232. The 42nd gate is a format energy. And in this relationship, the 42nd gate is connected to the 25th gate. And when we're looking at the 42nd gate, one of the things to recognize about the 42nd gate is that it gives the power for completion. This is very important for us in the context of our discussion. It brings the power of completion. The nature of the 5342, which is the format energy of the abstract process, the root to the sacral. In the 53, what you have is the pressure for the human experiential way, that is the pressure to enter into experience. And what you have in the 42 is the capacity, the sacral capacity, to generate that experience to its rightful end. However long that experience lasts, whether it's an experience for the moment or it's the experience of being in a body in a lifetime. So the 42nd gate is this capacity to bring things to fruition. And you can see that the 42 here in the first line is diversification. Now again, the theme of our time. In other words, if you really want to see the fruition or the maturation of our time, the evidence is vast diversity. And again, if you look at that spiritually, you can come back to where my whole emphasis is on differentiation, because differentiation is just another way of expressing diversity. In other words, that the mature capacity is to be able to identify diversification. Now look, if you wake up and you become your own authority, that's one way of being an awakened, differentiated force. But the fact that science has already mapped the genome means that we can identify everybody individually anyway. So whether you wake up or not doesn't matter. We already know, because we can already prove that difference. You can take a strand of hair and find the villain in the plot. We've already figured out how to recognize differentiation at the genetic level. The platform's there. Spiritually, it's our time to recognize differentiation in this way, becoming awake. But becoming awake not through belief system, but becoming awake through the same kind of science. The science of what human design is, the mechanics of awakeness. But everything about the 42 is that this is a maturation that is only there through diversification. What's really interesting, I want to do the 25-1 first, otherwise somebody's going to complain. The first line of the 25 is selflessness, motiveless action. the universalization of activity, psychic attunement that is its own reward. Motiveless action, this is the underlying spirit of diversification, is that if you get to the point of differentiation and everybody is living out their differentiated reality, then there's no need for motive. Only the not self needs a motive, because it's always making up reasons. The foundation of spirit, all first lines are foundations. The foundation of spirit is motiveless action. Things just happen. They just do. And the moment that the passenger doesn't interfere, and the moment that the passenger isn't concerned, then things happen as they should. And what happens, that is what motiveless action leads to, is diversification and differentiation. In other words, that's their natural relationship. And you can't have one without the other. These are these basic binaries. You can see how important it is, as an example, that if you're a 25, if you carry the 25, I do, for example, if you're somebody that carries the 25, how important it is for you to have 42s in your life. Not simply for the benefit that is at a direct level. In other words, it brings this mutative quality into the air. But again, it's a way of participating in the whole mutative process. And the more you become sensitive to these things, the more you begin to recognize that they really do work that way. When there's a 42 in my aura, I'm even more differentiated than normal. I'm already differentiated, but I become rigidly differentiated, because this is the impact of this connection. The final thing here is to look at the 32. But let me show you the picture. You can see it's colored in here. And you can see very clearly, by the way, that's an 8, that's not a 0. You can see very clearly that these are the gates of the splenic center. And every single one of these gates of the splenic center, they're gates of fear. So one of the things to recognize about the way in which all epochs operate and all cycles operate is they operate through a fear program. A fear program. Now remember that fear, to really recognize the value of fear, is to understand that fear is the root of intelligence. It's out of fear that intelligence grows. It's out of fear that the strategy to protect oneself and so forth and so on, all of these things develop. And you can see that each of these cycles, they have their own specific fear. Again, it would be a historian's holiday to be able to play around with the fears of these various eras as we move through. If you look at our era now, that fear is the 32nd gate. We're going to see that there's really going to be a change in the nature of fear. We go into the next cycle. Well, when we're looking at the 32nd gate, we're looking at something very, very, very basic. This is the fear of failure. Now, of course, I'm not talking about the fear of failure on a personal level. Obviously the fear of failure on a personal level, if you're somebody who's carrying the 32nd gate, that's always going to be a theme for you. It's something to deal with in your life. But the thing to recognize about this fear of failure, it's something else. What it represents is the fear that there isn't going to be enough talent. 54, read 54 when I say that. The fear is that there's not going to be enough talent to replenish the gene pool in order for survival to be assured. Now the 44th gate is the fear of extinction. Now this 32nd gate is the fear that if there's not enough talent, that's where we're headed towards. We're headed towards extinction. That's why the 32nd gate is always waiting for the 54. It's waiting to recognize potential. And at the moment it recognizes potential, it sees a future. It sees a future for the whole mechanism. So this is the fear that's been driving us since 1615. Since 1615, by the way, the population of the world between 1615 and today, the differences are incredible, astronomical. There was maybe, maybe 70 million, maybe 80 million people in the world then, and we've got 6 billion now. So you have this enormous population. This 30-second game, I've grown up in an era where everybody bitched about population. It was one of the, most common complaints at a planetary level was that the more human beings we were creating, the faster that we were stripping away the resources, and how cruel it was that we've got 40,000 babies that die every hour, 40,000 every hour, simply because they don't have nutrition, they don't have medical care, they don't have anything to stop the diarrhea, whatever the case may be. It's, it's a horror. Yet at the same time, to understand that the program doesn't care. The program doesn't care that there are 40,000 babies that die an hour. To grasp that. These are just mechanisms, larger mechanisms that are at work, any more than you care about the millions of cells that are dying all the time in your body. It's not like you're holding funerals all the time. 36 of them went, let's go. You'd be wearing black every millisecond for the rest of your existence. We just don't do that. The program doesn't do that. At the program's level, those lives don't mean anything. But you can see that under the pressure of this 30-second gate, we have had a population explosion. This is the cause of the population explosion since 1615. Now, when I say that, you can't isolate it from everything else that's part of this configuration of these particular 8 gates. But one of the underlying themes of the cycle that we're in is producing more and more and more. Now, understand, all the 32 cares about is there any potential for the future? Now, the chances of finding potential increase exponentially with population. After all, the more there are, the more chance there is that you're going to find those things that you need. Those tens of millions of scientists that we now have. So this whole business about the expansion of the human population and that it's our fault, it's always our fault, eh? Have you ever noticed that? It's always our fault. Bad humans. It's always our fault. We're the ones who mess everything up. We're the ones who do everything wrong. We're the ones who have fallen from grace. We're the ones that destroy the earth. We're the bad guys. It's insane. It's just a program. It's not somebody wagging their finger saying, we need more birth control out there. I want to tell you what birth control has done. The only thing that birth control has done is that it's allowed women on the pill to urinate into the water table. Do think about that. Think about that. Millions upon millions upon millions upon millions upon millions of women. Yeah. Sterility is what we're getting from birth control. It's sort of obvious in its own way. We've been under enormous pressure to find those amongst us that were going to allow us to transform. Remember, we're back to the channel of transformation. Here we are at the 32. This is the fear that transforms us. And because there's this fear that we're not going to have what we need, we keep on producing more and more and more and more and more and more and more. Now, what do you think's going to happen when we get to 2027? The bubble's going to burst. It's just going to burst. We're not going to be able to make more that way anymore. And the forces that have always tried to keep making more imbalance are going to become more and more powerful. Like the sterility that's been placed into the water table. Like the holes in the ozone layer. Slowly but surely, the zillions of chemicals that are in our environment, and please understand, I have no moral qualms with any of that. It's just what is. It's all one thing. It's all one living force. It's all one mechanism. It's all one program. So I think it's fun to see this 32 and to see that, there it is driving us, really driving us to make more. It's not like it's going to come back either. It isn't. This is the end game. This is the example. This is the whole heart of it. Keep on making more, keep on making more, keep on making more, keep on finding out more. We need more and more and more and more ants and drones. I've told this story a few times. The best laugh. I know I shouldn't even call it the best laugh because it was the most uncomfortable laugh I ever had. No, I just finished my experience with the voice, or it finished me. And it was a couple of days later. And I was very depressed. It's a very high place to fall back to earth, particularly the world that I lived in at that moment. And I saw, because I was high on a hill, I saw a car come up, and I saw somebody who I knew. I recognized the car, retired scientist friend of mine. And he opened up the back of his car and he took out 2 bundles of magazines. I didn't know that then. I just saw 2 bundles, and he put them on the road beside the pathway up to my Rowena, and he took off. And so I went down the pathway, and these were New Scientists, same publication I just showed you this morning. And it was 2 years of New Scientists, and they were in 2 neatly stacked bundles and neatly tied, and I grabbed both of them, and I went walking back up the hill, back up to my Rowena, and I sat down under a fig tree, and I put these 2 bundles in front of me. And I opened up the oldest bundle, the earlier year. I was going to read them in progression. And I take up the first magazine, and I open it up. And by the time I get it open, I start laughing. I couldn't imagine anything more bizarre. Now, here I was, an absolute freak. An absolute freak. I was living in a ruin. I had no money. I had no people in my life. I'd just been through this bizarre experience with this weird force, had all this information inside of me. And there in front of me is tens of millions of hours of research. Tens of millions of hours of research by scientists all over the planet in all kinds of subjects, covering the whole diversity of scientific thought in the moment, up to date, right there. And it was so ludicrous. Here I was, this, outrageous freak. And here are these, it was just all this knowledge. It was like they worked for me. Thank you very much. I didn't have to spend those 10 million hours. What do you do with one life? You go like that, or like that, or like that. But if you're going to be a messenger of synthesis, you can't spend your life just doing that or doing that. It was all there. All of it. This is the magic. It's part of the magic. This incredible diversity, all of this incredible information, and the whole vast population, all driven by one theme: the fear we won't find the talent we need in order to solve the questions we have to solve in this round. That's all it's about. For the program, it's nothing more. Make sure they keep breeding till they get what they need. And the moment out of the womb of us comes those that can bring all of those answers. That's the point. And in order to be able to do that, look at what we've had to go through. To feed 6 billion of us, in order to get the advantage of a tiny percentage of what they can provide the totality. Not each and every one of us individually. Just a program. It's not about blaming the third world because they have higher birth rates. It's not about putting the blame of population on this or that or the other thing. It's simply the program at work. 2027. The door will close on that. You're going to see a real crash. Okay, that's all for today.